Chapter 34, Part 2 of New Grub Street. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bridget Gage. New Grub Street by George Gissing. Chapter 34, Part 2. A Check. "Mr. Hinks and Mr. Gorbutt inquired very kindly after you today," said the girl, as she seated herself. "Oh, is Hinks out again?" "Yes, but he looks very ill." They conversed of such matters until Mrs. Yule, now her own servant, brought in the dinner. After the meal Marian was in her bedroom for about an hour. Then she went to her father, who sat in idleness, smoking. "What is your mother doing?" he asked, as she entered. "Some needlework." "I had perhaps better say," he spoke rather stiffly, and with averted face, "that I make no exclusive claim to the use of this room. As I can no longer pretend to study, it would be idle to keep up the show of privacy that mustn't be disturbed. Perhaps you will mention to your mother that she is quite at liberty to sit here whenever she chooses." It was characteristic of him that he should wish to deliver this permission by proxy, but Marian understood how much was implied in such an announcement. "I will tell mother," she said, "but at this moment I wish to speak to you privately. How would you advise me to invest my money?" Yule looked surprised, and answered with cold dignity: "It is strange that you should put such a question to me. I have supposed your interests were in the hands of some competent person." "This will be my private affair, father. I wish to get as high a rate of interest as I safely can." "I really must decline to advise, or interfere in any way. But, as you have introduced this subject, I may as well put a question which is connected with it. Could you give me any idea as to how long you are likely to remain with us?" "At least a year," was the answer, "and very likely much longer." "Am I to understand, then, that your marriage is indefinitely postponed?" "Yes, father." "And will you tell me why?" "I can only say that it has seemed better to both of us." Yule detected the sorrowful emotion she was endeavouring to suppress. His conception of Milvain's character made it easy for him to form a just surmise as to the reasons for this postponement. He was gratified to think that Marian might learn how rightly he had judged her wooer, and an involuntary pity for the girl did not prevent his hoping that the detestable alliance was doomed. With difficulty he refrained from smiling. "I will make no comment on that," he remarked with a certain emphasis. "But do you imply that this investment of which you speak is to be solely for your own advantage?" "For mine, and for yours and mother's." There was a silence of a minute or two. As yet it had not been necessary to take any steps for raising money, but a few months more would see the family without resources, save those provided by Marian, who, without discussion, had been simply setting aside what she received for her work. "You must be well aware," said Yule at length, "that I cannot consent to benefit by any such offer. When it is necessary, I shall borrow on the security of—" "Why should you do that, father?" Marian interrupted. "My money is yours. If you refuse it as a gift, then why may not I lend it to you as well as a stranger? Repay me when your eyes are restored. For the present, all our anxieties are at an end. We can live very well until you are able to write again." For his sake she put it in his way. Supposing him never able to earn anything, then indeed would come a time of hardship. But she could not contemplate that. The worst would only befall them in case she was forsaken by Jasper, and if that happened, all else would be of little account. "This has come upon me as a surprise," said Yule, in his most reserved tone. "I can give no definite reply. I must think of it." "Should you like me to ask mother to bring her sewing here now?" asked Marian, rising. "Yes, you may do so." In this way the awkwardness of the situation was overcome, and when Marian next had occasion to speak of money matters, no serious objection was offered to her proposal. Dora Milvain of course learned what had come to pass. To anticipate criticism, her brother imparted to her the decision at which Marian and he had arrived. She reflected with an air of discontent. "So you are quite satisfied," was her question at length, "that Marian should toil to support her parents as well as herself?" "Can I help it?" "I shall think very ill of you if you don't marry her in a year at latest." "I tell you, Marian has made a deliberate choice. She understands me perfectly, and is quite satisfied with my projects. You will have the kindness, Dora, not to disturb her faith in me." "I agree to that, and in return I shall let you know when she begins to suffer from hunger. It won't be very long till then, you may be sure. How do you suppose 3 people are going to live on 100 a year? And it's very doubtful indeed whether Marian can earn as much as £50. Never mind, I shall let you know when she is beginning to starve, and doubtless that will amuse you." At the end of July Maud was married. Between Mr. Dollimore and Jasper existed no superfluous kindness, each resenting the other's self-sufficiency. But Jasper, when once satisfied of his proposed brother-in-law's straightforwardness, was careful not to give offence to a man who might some day serve him. Provided this marriage resulted in moderate happiness to Maud, it was undoubtedly a magnificent stroke of luck. Mrs. Lane, the lady who has so often been casually mentioned, took upon herself those offices in connection with the ceremony which the bride's mother is wont to perform. At her house was held the wedding breakfast, and such other absurdities of usage as recommend themselves to society. Dora, of course, played the part of a bridesmaid, and Jasper went through his duties with the suave seriousness of a man who has convinced himself that he cannot afford to despise anything that the world sanctions. About the same time occurred another event, which was to have more importance for this aspiring little family than could as yet be foreseen. Whelpdale's noteworthy idea triumphed. The weekly paper called Chat was thoroughly transformed, and appeared as Chit Chat. From the first number, the success of the enterprise was beyond doubt. In a month's time all England was ringing with the fame of this noble new development of journalism. The proprietor saw his way to a solid fortune, and other men who had money to embark began to scheme imitative publications. It was clear that the quarter educated would soon be abundantly provided with literature to their taste. Whelpdale's exultation was unbounded. But in the 5th week of the life of Chit Chat something happened which threatened to overturn his sober reason. Jasper was walking along the Strand one afternoon, when he saw his ingenious friend approaching him in a manner scarcely to be accounted for, unless Whelpdale's abstemiousness had for once given way before convivial invitation. The young man's hat was on the back of his head, and his coat flew wildly as he rushed forwards with perspiring face and glaring eyes. He would have passed without observing Jasper, had not the latter called to him. Then he turned round, laughed insanely, grasped his acquaintance by the wrists, and drew him aside into a court. "What do you think?" he panted. "What do you think has happened?" "No one would suppose, I hope. You seem to have gone mad." "I've got Lake's place on Chit Chat," cried the other hoarsely. 250 a year. Lake and the editor quarrelled, pummelled each other, neither know nor care what it was about. My fortune's made." "You're a modest man," remarked Jasper, smiling. "Certainly I am. I have always admitted it. But remember that there's my connection with Fleet as well. No need to give that up. Presently I shall be making a clear 600, my dear sir. A clear 600 if a penny." "Satisfactory so far." "But you must remember that I'm not a big gun like you. Why, my dear Milvain, a year ago I should have thought an income of 200 a glorious competence. I don't aim at such things as are fit for you. You won't be content till you have thousands. Of course I know that. But I'm a humble fellow. Yet no, by jingo, I'm not. In one way I'm not, I must confess it." "In what instance are you arrogant?" "I can't tell you, not yet. This is neither time nor place. I say, when will you dine with me? I shall give a dinner to half a dozen of my acquaintances somewhere or other. Poor old Biffen must come. When can you dine?" "Give me a week's notice, and I'll fit it in." That dinner came duly off. On the day that followed, Jasper and Dora left town for their holiday. They went to the Channel Islands, and spent more than half of the 3 weeks they had allowed themselves in Sark. Passing over from the Guernsey to that island, they were amused to see a copy of Chit Chat in the hands of an obese and well-dressed man. "Is he one of the quarter educated?" asked Dora, laughing. "Not in Whelpdale's sense of the word, but, strictly speaking, no doubt he is. The quarter educated consist of a very large class indeed. How large, the huge success of that paper is demonstrating. I'll write to Whelpdale, and let him know that his benefaction has extended even to Sark." This letter was written, and in a few days there came a reply. "Why, the fellow has written to you as well!" exclaimed Jasper. taking up a second letter. Both were on the table of their sitting room when they came to their lodgings for lunch. "That's his hand." "It looks like it." Dora hummed an air as she regarded the envelope. Then she took it away with her to her room upstairs. "What had he to say?" Jasper inquired when she came down again and seated herself at the table. "Oh, a friendly letter. What does he say to you?" Dora had never looked so animated and fresh of colour since leaving London. Her brother remarked this, and was glad to think that the air of the Channel should be doing her so much good. He read Whelpdale's letter aloud. It was facetious, but oddly respectful. "The reverence that fellow has for me is astonishing," he observed with a laugh. "The queer thing is, it increases the better he knows me." Dora laughed for 5 minutes. "Oh, what a splendid epigram!" she exclaimed. "It is indeed a queer thing, Jasper. Do you mean that to be a good joke, or was it better still by coming out unintentionally?" "You are in remarkable spirits, old girl. By the by, would you mind letting me see that letter of yours?" He held out his hand. "I left it upstairs," Dora replied carelessly. "Rather presumptuous in him, it seems to me." "Oh, he writes quite as respectfully to me as he does to you," she returned, with a peculiar smile. "But what business has he to write at all? It's confounded impertinence, now I come to think of it. I shall give him a hint to remember his position." Dora could not be quite sure whether he spoke seriously or not. As both of them had begun to eat with an excellent appetite, a few moments were allowed to pass before the girl again spoke. "His position is as good as ours," she said at length. "As good as ours? The sub of a paltry rag like Chit Chat, and assistant to a literary agency?" "He makes considerably more money than we do." "Money! What's money?" Dora was again mirthful. "Oh, of course money is nothing. We write for honour and glory. Don't forget to insist on that when you reprove Mr Whelpdale. No doubt it will impress him." Late in the evening of that day, when the brother and sister had strolled by moonlight up to the windmill which occupies the highest point of Sark, and as they stood looking upon the pale expanse of sea, dotted with the gleam of lighthouses near and far, Dora broke the silence to say quietly: "I may as well tell you that Mr Whelpdale wants to know if I will marry him." "The deuce he does!" cried Jasper with a start. "If I didn't half suspect something of that kind! What astounding impudence!" "You seriously think so?" "Well, don't you? You hardly know him, to begin with. And then oh, confound it!" "Very well, I'll tell him that his impudence astonishes me." "You will?" "Certainly, of course in civil terms. But don't let this make any difference between you and him. Just pretend to know nothing about it. No harm is done." "You are speaking in earnest?" "Quite. He has written in a very proper way, and there's no reason whatever to disturb our friendliness with him. I have a right to give directions in a matter like this, and you'll please to obey them." Before going to bed, Dora wrote a letter to Mr Whelpdale, not, indeed, accepting his offer forthwith, but conveying to him with much gracefulness an unmistakable encouragement to persevere. This was posted on the morrow, and its writer continued to benefit most remarkably by the sun and breezes and rock scrambling of Sark. Soon after their return to London, Dora had the satisfaction of paying the first visit to her sister at the Dollimores' house in Ovington Square. Maud was established in the midst of luxuries, and talked with laughing scorn of the days when she had inhabited Grub Street. Her literary tastes were henceforth to serve as merely a note of distinction, an added grace which made evident her superiority to the well-attired and smooth-tongued people among whom she was content to shine. On the one hand, she had contact with the world of fashionable literature, on the other with that of fashionable ignorance. Mrs Lane's house was a meeting point of the two spheres. "I shan't be there very often," remarked Jasper, as Dora and he discussed their sister's magnificence. "That's all very well in its way, but I aim at something higher." "So do I," Dora replied. "I'm very glad to hear that. I confess it seemed to me that you were rather too cordial with Whelpdale yesterday." "One must behave civilly. Mr Whelpdale quite understands me." "You are sure of that? He didn't seem quite so gloomy as he ought to have been." "The success of Chit Chat keeps him in good spirits." It was perhaps a week after this that Mrs Dollimore came quite unexpectedly to the house by Regent's Park, as early as 11 o'clock in the morning. She had a long talk in private with Dora. Jasper was not at home. When he returned towards evening, Dora came to his room, with a countenance which disconcerted him. "Is it true," she asked abruptly, standing before him with her hands strained together, "that you have been representing yourself as no longer engaged to Marian?" "Who has told you so?" "That doesn't matter. I have heard it, and I want to know from you that it is false." Jasper thrust his hands into his pockets and walked apart. "I can take no notice," he said with indifference, "of anonymous gossip." "Well, then, I will tell you how I have heard. Maud came this morning, and told me that Mrs. Betterton had been asking her about it. Mrs. Betterton had heard from Mrs. Lane." "From Mrs. Lane? And from whom did she hear, pray?" "That I don't know. Is it true or not?" "I have never told any one that my engagement was at an end," replied Jasper, deliberately. The girl met his eyes. "Then I was right," she said. "Of course I told Maud that it was impossible to believe this for a moment. But how has it come to be said?" "You might as well ask me how any lie gets into circulation among people of that sort. I have told you the truth, and there's an end of it." Dora lingered for a while, but left the room without saying anything more. She sat up late, mostly engaged in thinking, though at times an open book was in her hand. It was nearly 12:30 when a very light rap at the door caused her to start. She called, and Jasper came in. "Why are you still up?" he asked, avoiding her look as he moved forward and took a leaning attitude behind an easy chair. "Oh, I don't know. Do you want anything?" There was a pause. Then Jasper said, in an unsteady voice, "I am not given to lying, Dora, and I feel confoundedly uncomfortable about what I said to you early this evening. I didn't lie in the ordinary sense. It's true enough that I have never told any one that my engagement was at an end, but I have acted as if it were, and it's better I should tell you." His sister gazed at him with indignation. "You have acted as if you were free?" "Yes, I have proposed to Miss Rupert. How Mrs. Lane and that lot have come to know anything about this I don't understand. I'm not aware of any connecting link between them and the Ruperts, or the Barlows either. Perhaps there are none. Most likely the rumour has no foundation in their knowledge. Still, it is better that I should have told you. Miss Rupert has never heard that I was engaged, nor have her friends the Barlows. At least I don't see how they could have done. She may have told Mrs. Barlow of my proposal, probably would, and this may somehow have got round to those other people. But Maud didn't make any mention of Miss Rupert, did she?" Dora replied with a cold negative. "Well, there's the state of things. It isn't pleasant, but that's what I've done." "Do you mean that Miss Rupert has accepted you?" "No, I wrote to her. She answered that she was going to Germany for a few weeks, and that I should have her reply whilst she was away. I am waiting." "But what name is to be given to behaviour such as this?" "Listen. Didn't you know perfectly well that this must be the end of it?" "Do you suppose I thought you utterly shameless and cruel beyond words?" "I suppose I am both. It was a moment of desperate temptation, though. I had dined at the Ruperts', you remember, and it seemed to me there was no mistaking the girl's manner." "Don't call her a girl," broke in Dora, scornfully. "You say she is several years older than yourself." "Well, at all events, she's intellectual and very rich. I yielded to the temptation." "And deserted Marian just when she has most need of help and consolation. It's frightful!" Jasper moved to another chair and sat down. He was much perturbed. "Look here, Dora, I regret it, I do indeed. And what's more, if that woman refuses me, as it's more than likely she will, I will go to Marian and ask her to marry me at once. I promise that." His sister made a movement of contemptuous impatience. "And if the woman doesn't refuse you?" "Then I can't help it. But there's one thing more I will say. Whether I marry Marian or Miss Rupert, I sacrifice my strongest feelings. In one case to a sense of duty, in the other to worldly advantage. I was an idiot to write that letter, for I knew at the time that there was a woman who is far more to me than Miss Rupert and all her money, a woman I might, perhaps, marry. Don't ask any questions. I shall not answer them. As I have said, I wished you to understand my position fully. You know the promise I have made. Don't say anything to Marian. If I am left free, I shall marry her as soon as possible." And so he left the room. For a fortnight and more he remained in uncertainty. His life was very uncomfortable, for Dora would only speak to him when necessity compelled her. and there were 2 meetings with Marian, at which he had to act his part as well as he could. At length came the expected letter, very nicely expressed, very friendly, very complimentary, but a refusal. He handed it to Dora across the breakfast table, saying with a pinched smile, "Now you can look cheerful again. I am doomed." Chapter 34.